Journeying shamanically to meet the plants in our local land, including in our own garden, isn't something that might necessarily occur to us to do, even those of us on a nature based or shamanic path. And yet, as you'll hear in this episode with author Maria Rodale, there are incredible gifts when we do so. And it is surprisingly practical and simple. And so, if you have this sense, there is a deeper connection with the natural world and your local land that you're being called to create, this is the episode for you. Let's dive in. Hello, Maria. A huge welcome to the show.
Thank you. Hello, it's great to be here.
This really is my pleasure. Yes, as soon as I came across you and your work, I was like, this is a conversation that absolutely belongs on the show. So I'm so happy that we're here having this conversation. So I would love to start with just a sense of your own journey into the work that you do now. What brought you to writing a book about it? What brought you here?
Well, I mean, I've always been interested in, religion and spirituality, but my job was as a writer and publisher and CEO of a publishing company, and I specialized in writing about the organic movement. So I was invited to speak at a conference in California about organic farming, and I live on the East Coast, so to go to California is a big flight. And I thought, oh, while I'm there, I really want to check out this place called Esalen
Mm.
in Big Sur, which I've always heard about and thought, be really interesting to experience it. And the only course that was happening the weekend I had available to go was a course on shamanism. So I signed up and learned how to journey and um, just was blown away by how powerful the experience was and how easy and accessible it seemed. So that got me started. That was about 10 years ago. And I started journeying on my own at home for personal reasons, like trying to understand where the business was going, relationships, things like that. And about 5 years ago, we ended up selling the business. And then the pandemic came. And it was while uh, during the pandemic when I was home and I was like, I'm a crazy gardener. And I was like, I am going to have the most perfect, beautiful garden you've ever seen. Like it's just going to be perfect. And I have this plant in my garden that's considered invasive called mugwort.
Mm.
And so I was struggling and fighting with mugwort to get it to leave my garden. And I knew nothing about it other than that it was an invasive plant. And during that time, I had also worked with a local shaman. And during the pandemic, she was doing these Zoom journey sessions once a week, or, a couple of us just got together and journeyed and talked about our journeys. So at that point, I was like, I'm going to try and, talk to this mugwort and see what it's trying to tell me. And that just opened up a whole floodgate of different perspectives about nature and realizing that I had the ability to speak with these plants and animals. And so at that point, I decided I'm going to talk to everything that annoys me in my yard and understand why they annoy me. And that led to me writing the book Love Nature Magic, which came out last February, and was a whole magical experience in itself.
Oh, I bet. I really love the way that that story seemed so, the fact that you kind of, it just happened to be that course in shamanism. It could have been something completely different, but of course it wasn't because it was meant to be that.
Hmm.
I love that. And as you probably know, at least in this country, mugwort is seen as, I guess you could say, like a shamanic herb, like it's used for, all sorts of herbal cleansing reasons. So that feels a really interesting synchronicity too. So I have to know, what did it tell you when you journeyed to meet with it? What did it tell you?
Well, it was a very sort of quick and door opening journey where Mugwort was like, why are you trying to kill me? It's like, don't you realize that plants rule the world and, you're never going to win this battle? And so that seemed like a really simple message. But it opened the door, and Mugwort just kept coming into my life over and over again, and actually still is teaching me. So, for example, in the book, I write about how, mugwort's a plant that's good for, sleep. I don't have any sleep problems. Well, after I published the book, I ended up having a stroke, and in the sort of aftermath of testing all the reasons why I might have had a stroke, turns out I have sleep apnea. So I feel like Mugwort is constantly still guiding me and teaching me and trying to help me, even though sometimes I resist being helped.
Goodness. Yeah, you touch on something there that I want to come back to, but I don't want to go there because I'm just making a mental note to come back to something in what you just said there. What I love about that story and what you're talking about in your book is there is something so practical about what you're talking about here, which for me is like in some ways like the very heart of shamanism. We can see it as being this kind of, very almost like out there, intensely magical kind of only for certain people kind of practice, where of course it went by all sorts of names and had all sorts of traditions, but really like at its heart the reason that shamanism has gone back for eons and is still around today is because it is inherently practical. It's used so that we can survive, that we can work with the world around us. And I think what you're describing here is such a kind of like a modern day step back into that understanding of like, this is something that is actually useful, we can use in our everyday lives to navigate in our lives, our homes, our gardens, which I think is a really important thing for all of us to know.
Absolutely. Yeah, I am constantly journeying with questions that I need help answering. And, whether they're health questions or questions like, why am I constantly seeing this bird or animal? What is it trying to tell me? And it has completely shifted my perspective on my life, on nature, on what's important and what's not important, and it's useful. It's very useful, and I like the whole definition that I don't even know if I talk about this in the book, but the idea that it's just a direct revelation. It's a direct relationship with the universe, your spirit guides, whatever you want to call it, and so you've got like this whole resource available to you to help you. And what journeying does is just it opens the door and provides the answers.
Beautifully said. There's so much in just that initial conversation you had with Mugwort where I think we have such a human-centric sense of our place in the world of things, where it's kind of like humans at the top of the hierarchy or the middle, and then it's kind of everything else is of lesser importance. And that first message you got about is kind of like, well, plants rule the world. Like, even if you wanted to kill us off, you couldn't. What I've seen in all of the many conversations, relationships I've had with all kinds of beings, but particularly plants, are things of that. There's something really like humbling and sort of bringing us back to our real place in the web, in the ecology of things, that I think is a really helpful starting point, where it stops us thinking, oh, how do I get even better at dominating, and starts to kind of shift us back into a more,
Right.
as far as I can see, more natural way of relating to everything.
Right. So as a gardener, I often look to, the British gardening kind of traditions as my inspiration. And what shifted for me, and actually, in England, this is happening too, with the whole rewilding movement. Um, what shifted was this idea that, like, my job as a gardener is to create a habitat for the wildness, including me. Nature wants me to be more wild. So I now grow a lot of mugwort.
Intentionally now.
But well, I've given up. But what's happened, and again, this is since I published Love Nature Magic. I had a full year of not weeding. I mean, definitely not aggressively weeding. I mean, I'd pull out poison ivy here or there, or something that was in the way. But what I have seen transform in my garden is just incredible, where roses that have been there happily for 20 years have doubled in size. Trees that were, struggling, in, I thought, the wrong space, have again doubled in size. And what I'm realizing is that, weeds, we look at weeds as like competition and the enemy, but they're really helpers. They're assisting in the microbiome under in the roots in the plants, and they're all working together. And if we just look at that as there's nothing out there that's an enemy. Everything is collaborating, and it's our job just to kind of collaborate with it. Then, I mean, even my vegetable garden has just like exploded in growth. So there's something here that I think we should all be exploring.
Collaborators. That's such a beautiful and, as far as I'm concerned, true perspective on our true role as, those of us consider ourselves gardeners. I'm a very keen gardener too, and more and more that's where I see my role is, and it really is. There's allowing ourselves to be taught, isn't there, is a kind of like, we need to learn how to be good collaborators, which requires the kinds of things you're talking about,
Right.
including ways to have those conversations, whether that's journeying shamanically or other ways. But there is a kind of listening needed to even know how to be a good collaborator, because, hey, we've been conditioned out of that for generations and generations, and yet I think it's absolutely something we can relearn, reclaim. The thing that I was wondering earlier, and the example you gave with the mugwort and the sleep apnea, I think is potentially an example of this. Over time, as you've learned to relate to your garden and the plants, the beings within it, have you noticed the ways that it's also revealing aspects of your own self, your own psyche, things that are happening kind of in your inner world are in some way either being reflected or being shown to you by those beings that you're now in collaboration with in your garden?
It's definitely an ongoing conversation. And, one of the chapters I did was on ticks.
We do.
And I don't know if you have ticks in England, but, we have, yeah, and Lyme disease. And I just went through a
Oh,
second
goodness.
bout of Lyme disease. And, you know, so fortunately I catch it early and, took the medicine and everything. But even though I wrote the chapter on ticks and I felt compassion for them and understood their perspective, I was like, dag nabbit, why are you, making me like afraid to go out in nature, and why are you attacking me? And so actually, just before this call, I opened up the chapter. I was like, what did Tick tell me? And the message was to relax. And I was like, oh God, I really need to hear that, because I have not been relaxed lately.
Mm.
So even it's a constant relearning and reminding and shifting also, because every
Yes.
relationship is
I
evolving.
really I love that so much. And that word relationship, I think, is such an important one. There's something that I continually talk about in terms of the way that ultimately this is all about relationship. Whatever the thing is, whatever we're talking about, ultimately is finding our way back to recognizing it's a relationship. And one of the things that I think we really could do with understanding as a modern culture, as we're kind of like in this perhaps sort of second psychedelic renaissance where people are embracing again, working with teacher plants, whilst I think there is something really healing and beautiful about that, what I also see is we are I guess somewhat immature as a culture in terms of not recognizing that it's still a relationship with another being. And until we've got good at relationship, perhaps that would be the right thing to do before approaching these very large, powerful spirits. And the work that we're often in with our students is really encouraging those kind of relationships with the beings like on the land around them, and just like you're talking about here. So instead of, for example, flying straight to Peru to sit with ayahuasca, perhaps start with sitting with the rose in your garden. Start there, because firstly, you may find you don't even need to go to Peru and sit with ayahuasca actually after all. But even if that is for whatever reason aligned, there is so much we can learn directly from the rose, the nettle, the whatever it is that we're surrounded by. But it also kind of teaches us to be able to be in relationship in a real way, an honest way. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, because I
Yeah.
think what we're talking about here is like, if I could just give people kind of like one first step on the journey of like, again, working, whether you want to say it like shamanically, working with teacher plants, it's like, start here, start with what you're surrounded by, because we're like,
Yeah.
every garden is teeming with potential friends and allies and guides and teachers.
Oh, I have a lot of thoughts on this. The first thing to know is that I do not use psychedelics, or um, you know, I haven't done ayahuasca. Um, so when I journey, I'm only using the sound of a drum. Um, but I did a lot of drugs when I was younger, so I know what the experience is. Um, I'm not opposed to people doing it, but what I see happening is so many people like relying on the actual drug, to give them some enlightenment. And that is just such a simplistic, artificial process. It's like, you have to do the work. And the work is not just kind of escaping through a psychedelic experience, but it's actually like looking within and developing a relationship that's truly personal. And you can develop a relationship with the ayahuasca
Mm.
plants without actually imbibing them, if that's what you're passionate about. Or with mushrooms, you can have these conversations and learn these insights. But the real thing that I think these plants want us to do and are trying to teach us is to rethink and change our behavior to be more in alignment and in balance with nature. And if you're not doing that, no matter how many, psychedelic experiences you have, then you're not learning the lesson that you need to learn and integrating it into your life. A lot of the messages I am getting right now in my journeys is just to stay focused on looking within and not look to some outside experience or teacher or book or anything to give me the answers. The answers are right here. They're inside me. They're in my relationship with my garden and with the people and the plants around me. I think the overuse of plant medicine is a form of kind of spiritual bypassing that isn't healthy for anybody.
There's something in the way that you just described what you're talking about there that really hit me, where I agree entirely. We don't need to ingest anything in order to build a relationship with it, learn from it, whether it's mushrooms or grass or anything. And there was something I think really important in what you were saying there, even though you didn't say it directly. I could feel this. There's when we are opening to create a relationship with the plants in our gardens, of course what that allows us to do is have like an embodied relationship, as in it's physically there, it has a place, it has needs, it has certain patterns that we get to be in this like embodied relationship with, which I think there is something very important in that, firstly, if we are used to being in embodied relationship more than anything else, with obviously whether it be our parents, our friends, our spouses, children, animals. And so I think there is something that is just more accessible when we have that opportunity to have an embodied relationship. And there's, how can I put this? It's around that word integration. And I think, a real sign for me of integration is it showing up? Like, if someone watched us, would our actual life be changing materially? Would we be acting different? Would we be moving our body differently? Would we be performing different tasks, doing different things in the day? And again, that's the wonderful thing. The more we're working in an embodied way with these plants around us, the more it kind of naturally leads to an integration. I'd love to hear your thoughts on all of that.
Right. Well, I'll go back to mugwort because, there's a part of me, I come from, in the publishing background where, I know a lot of herbalists and, people who are making plant, teas and tinctures. And I've always felt like, ugh, I don't really do that. And I don't really want to do that. And like with mugwort, it's like, I've eaten it once or twice and I've made some smudge sticks once or twice, but like, I don't feel that it wants me to consume it. It wants to be a partner and respected. And so there's a little bit of like this, anti-colonization thing going on where, no, you don't need to like harvest me and sell me, you just need to listen and pay attention. And so that relationship is an ongoing one of sharing information and sharing insights. And to me, the biggest sign of success is, so, I have a nice house in the country, and I I'm hire electricians and plumbers and things, and to a person, everybody who comes to my house, no matter where they are in the spectrum of you know life stage, is like, whoa, this garden is magic. This is incredible. This is the most beautiful garden I've ever seen. And so that's the medicine right there. It's not, the tea I make, or, and I think, again, as people, we're taught to look at, okay, I need to take this pill, or, do this thing, and that's going to save me, or heal me. And it's really, I think, just about having right relationship with things.
That's I love that you brought in the way that anyone visiting can kind of feel something there. Of course, you could say, well, anywhere we go, there is, live beings that are kind of an invitation into that experience. But there's certainly, my own experience has shown that land that has been related to in that way, beings that have been related to in that way, and whether we do that in terms of, I don't know, making offerings, or whether it be being in that conversation you're talking about, there is something that we can feel when we enter a space that's been related to in that way. And I love the way that you're saying, even people who you may think aren't necessarily sort of open and sensitive to that can still feel that. Because I think as much visually, I'm sure your garden's beautiful. I suspect what you're talking about is beyond that too. It's like there's a feeling in it.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. 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 I mean, I had an electrician tell me just last week, this is the most beautiful garden, the most beautiful yard I've ever been in my life. And, it was a good time of year. All the roses were in bloom.
But there is something, again, just so, it feels as though there is something that's almost like a human birthright to be able to experience that, whatever that is that he experienced. It feels like there's something so special, so healing. I want to go back. Oh, sorry, please.
And well, I will just stress that is with the weeds still there, like the weeds were right there along with the other plants. So it wasn't like, oh, this is the most perfectly manicured, beautiful garden.
We were clearly in sync, so because I was about to say I'd like to go back to the conversation around rewilding. So great minds. So one of the things that has been really clear from when we moved in this house 11 years ago, and this was really before that whole kind of rewilding thing really kind of like was, I don't think I was necessarily fully conscious of that at the time, but just sort of intuitively, organically, it made sense to me not to use weed killers, not to use insecticides, to just see how we could work with the garden in a way that just made sense to me. And over the years, that has become more and more a conscious thing, where there's certain areas which are like fully left to go wild, kind of in the lawn. There's a kind of like growing meadow area, and it's been really interesting noticing my relationship to that, but also as people visit, how again we've got such a view of a garden ought to be manicured and very like no weeds, no this, no that. But I think it feels to me, and again, this is like based on a sort of study of noticing people's reactions over the years. It feels as though we are starting to shift culturally, where we can see that doesn't necessarily equal a beautiful garden, that everything, has been chosen. There is this like just natural ecology that it seems to me, I've noticed this year, I've had more people comment on that meadow area, than ever before. And again, it may not mean anything, but it feels to me there is something in that where we're starting to realize, like, oh, there's something right about that.
Yeah. Yeah. So one of, again, since the book was published, I went to hear a speaker who's an entomologist. His name is Doug Tallamy, and he explained that a lot of the plants we considered weeds are actually important host plants for the caterpillars and insects that birds like to eat. So, and like two of them were weeds that I have a lot of. So, evening primrose and Virginia creeper. So that was like a trigger for me to say, I'm not gonna pick these weeds. I'm gonna let them grow and see what happens. And the evening primrose gets to be like 6 feet tall and has these yellow flowers. And I ended up seeing more hummingbirds that I had ever seen before, just feeding on the flowers of the evening primrose, let alone what the birds might have been, the other birds might have been eating. And Virginia creeper has a beautiful fall color. It gets bright red. And so that shifting of perspective, that the garden shouldn't be just, visual candy for us. It has to serve a greater purpose, the wider community. And we may not understand what that community needs until we just relax a little bit and see what happens.
Yes, I love that so much. So perhaps if we talk a little bit more about now, of course, there's again so many ways that we can learn to be good collaborators, learn to be in relationship. But I'd like to come back to where we began with this, looking at it through the lens of journeying shamanically to do so, which again is something that very much is not the only way. Again, I've created relationships with plants, but it certainly has been a powerful way. And I think there is something again very like natural to humans to work in that way, to kind of enter a place where we're open and available to have those kind of conversations with other beings. So for someone who that is at the moment something new to, they've maybe perhaps heard of the idea of shamanic journeys but not enter one themselves, what would you suggest?
Um, so I'm a big believer in, follow the clues in your own life. I call it the trail of books in my book, where, you know, everybody has different gifts and different talents. If you're interested in journeying, there's probably, um, put that intention out there, and the resources will come to you. In my book, Love, Nature, Magic, I write, the first, part of the book is really the history of journeying, how it works, the science behind it. And then in the back of the book, I have a list of resources that, there's the Society for Shamanic, whatever, I can't remember the name of it. There's a lot of resources out there, but it's also something that you can do if you follow the basic important rules, such as opening sacred space and using a drum. And I use an app on my phone for the drum. So it's something that you don't need to find an external source for. But if you want to, they're out there. And I mean, my book is a good place to start, just to get a basic grounding in how it works. So, and I'm
Yes,
sure
and I
you
think
guys have
I love
resources
what you
too.
said there, though. firstly, there is no right way. It's so accessible and there's so many different sources. And I completely agree. I mean, your own story is a great example of that. Just, following those breadcrumbs of, what's meant for you, what's meant for your
Mm-hmm.
soul. So even just to set their
Right.
intention, likely there will be a way that if someone feels the call to work in a, shamanic journeying sense, that will be met. That will absolutely be met. Um, I wonder, as we're coming towards the end of this conversation, if there's anything that we've not touched on yet that feels an important to add to this conversation as we're talking about this again in a weird way. It feels slightly almost an unusual conversation. Again, we're so used to hearing so many people talk about, again, these like big teacher plants, about, shamanism. But there's something I love about this, just like very everydayness of like, start with the relationship with the plants in your garden. There is something about that I find so refreshing, so like, yes, if everyone did that, the world would change. But I'd love to know, is there anything you think that's really important for us to speak about before we close on this conversation?
Well, one of the things that I learned through this process is that shamanism is a practice that comes from every culture in the world. So I think we're living in a time where, there's all kinds of tension and division, and don't culturally appropriate this or that, and but every single culture has some shamanic traditions, and we all can participate in it with peaceful knowing that it belongs to all of us, and we're all indigenous to this whole planet. So I think what the message I got is nature just wants us to learn how to live in balance with each other, with the plants, the animals, and even the things that annoy us. And we'll still be annoyed by things, but we have to live in balance with
Just
them.
like any family, really.
That's right. That's right. Exactly. Start where you are.
It reminds me of, I think it's that Ram Dass quote. There's something like, if you think you're enlightened, go spend a week with your family. Yeah. There's always plenty of lessons right where we
Exactly.
are. Um, oh, this is
Yeah.
it's been such a wonderful conversation. Where can listeners find out more about you and your work? You mentioned your book, but yeah, feel free to say more about that, but also other ways that people can find out about what you do.
Well, I have a website called mariarodale.com, which has links to all the things that I'm doing. But the way to stay in touch with me on a regular basis is I have a Substack newsletter called Life Unfiltered, and you can actually find it through my website, mariarodale.com. But I have my book, Love Nature Magic, which is published in the UK. And the other thing that I do, which is fun, that actually came from a shamanic journey, was I write children's books under the name Mrs. Pinochle, and the illustrator is actually a British woman, Jessie Ford, and they're alphabet books that teach kids and grown-ups about different parts of nature. So, books, Substack, my website, Instagram, it's all,
Mm. Oh,
I'm
I
there.
love the way those books came from this very thing that we're talking about. Such a beautiful example. Yeah,
Right.
the gifts just keep coming. They really do.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Maria. This has been a truly delightful conversation. I really, really love everything you're doing. And
Thank
again,
you.
just that simple invitation, like start with whatever, in fact, I think your example of like start with what annoys you in your garden, perhaps that is the perfect place to start.
That's right. If it
Yeah.
annoys you, it's trying to tell you something.
Oh,
Thank
thank
you. This
you.
has been such a pleasure.
I very much hope you enjoyed watching that. And if you did and you're not already subscribed, then do hit that bell thingy and subscribe to automatically get each fresh new episode as it's released each week. If you'd like to find out more about the work we do at Be Mythical to guide and support old souls in this new world to live their own unique myth, do hop along to bemythical.com and you'll find out all the ways you can join us and go deeper with us on your own mythical journey. Lots of love for now. Mwah. See you again next week.